I was sitting in a session with a client a few weeks ago. He was telling me a story of deep, personal grievance, his voice thick with emotion as he described a conflict with a family member. As a therapist, my role was clear. I leaned in, I nodded, I offered the scripted language of validation. That must have been incredibly difficult. I can hear how much that hurt you. From the outside, I was the model of clinical empathy. But inside, a different, almost forbidden process was unfolding. A quiet, observant part of my brain started flagging inconsistencies in the narrative. It wasn't that I thought he was lying exactly, but I sensed his story was less a reflection of reality and more a carefully constructed shield. He wasn't just asking me to understand his pain, he was demanding I ratify his version of events, to feel his outrage exactly as he felt it. And in that moment, as he looked at me, waiting for that final affirming nod, I felt this immense, invisible pressure. It was a cultural command, a voice that said my primary duty was not the truth or even to his long-term healing, but to the immediate validation of his feelings. To question his story, to introduce nuance, would be seen as a failure of empathy, an act of clinical cruelty. That gap between the empathy I was expected to perform and the objective reality I was beginning to suspect is a dangerous place. And it's a place more and more of us are being forced into, not just in therapy, but everywhere. Wow, that's an incredibly powerful and frankly pretty unsettling observation to kick us off.
It really is.
Because, when we think about empathy, we almost universally see it as this pure, unadulterated good. It's always praised, right?
Mhm.
The ultimate virtue, the glue holding society together.
The gold standard.
Exactly. But what you've just described, that internal dissonance, that feeling of a cultural demand for empathy, it suggests something else, something that might actually be, distorting genuine connection, maybe even eroding self-respect, leading to this profound exhaustion.
Mhm.
It paints a very, very different picture.
And what's truly fascinating here, I think, is that we're not really questioning the inherent value of empathy itself. Empathy in its purest form is a beautiful and necessary human capacity. That's not up for debate.
Right. Okay.
Instead, what this deep dive is about is exploring its overreach, how it's increasingly being performed, even mandated, in ways that have these deeply unintended and, frankly, often problematic consequences.
Mandated empathy. That sounds inherently contradictory.
It kind of is, isn't it? So we're going to unpack the psychological, the ethical toll of this mandated emotional performance.
Yeah.
Not just on professionals, like in your opening story, but actually on all of us, in our daily lives.
Right. From personal relationships
to the broader cultural discourse, exactly. It's really about seeing where empathy can go wrong when it gets pushed beyond its natural, healthy boundaries.
Right.
When it becomes this thing we have to do rather than something we genuinely feel.
Thinking about that opening story, I just kept imagining the reality for someone who's really on the absolute front lines, like a healthcare professional.
Oh, absolutely. The pressure there is immense.
I mean, they're dealing with human suffering all day, every day. It got me thinking about a specific scenario I heard about, not heard about, more like pieced together from research, and it really stuck with me. I've been thinking a lot about empathy lately. Not as the simple virtue we're all taught to admire, but as this complex and sometimes even dangerous force in our modern world. I was looking into the psychological toll of all this pressure to feel for others, and I tried to imagine the reality for a healthcare professional today. So imagine a nurse named Chloe working in a bustling, understaffed hospital somewhere like Manchester. Her performance isn't just measured by clinical skill, right? It's measured by a patient satisfaction score, which heavily weights her perceived empathy.
The metrics. Yeah.
Exactly. So she has a script of phrases she's supposed to use. I can see this is difficult for you. I understand your frustration. You know the drill. One evening, she's with an elderly patient, Mr. Gable, who is lonely and scared. He tries to tell her a story about his late wife.
Okay. A human moment.
A human moment. But Chloe, she has 4 other patients buzzing for her attention. That scorecard is looming in her mind. She interrupts him gently, she thinks. I understand this is a difficult time, Mr. Gable. Your feelings are valid, she recites, while efficiently checking his vitals. She's performing empathy, you see, not really feeling it.
Right. Taking the ball.
Inside, she's just a void of exhaustion. The next morning, a different nurse notices Mr. Gable is showing early signs of confusion that Chloe, focused on her empathy script, had missed. He was trying to tell her something important in his own way, not just share a memory.
Wow.
When I think about this, I don't see a bad nurse. I see a good person being absolutely crushed by a system. We've turned compassion into a key performance indicator, a task to be completed and scored. In doing so, we risk creating an environment where the true, spontaneous, life-saving moments of human connection are replaced by this hollow, scripted performance. It really begs the question, in our demand for measurable empathy, are we actually destroying the very thing we claim to value?
That's such a powerful illustration, and it highlights a core concept in this whole discussion: emotional labor. This term, it's not just about feeling emotions in your personal life, right? It's about actively managing them as a specific requirement of your job.
Managing emotions as work.
Exactly. Think about it.
Huh.
A flight attendant, a customer service rep, a teacher, and definitely a nurse, they all have these emotional expectations built right into their roles.
Okay.
Arlie Hochschild, a sociologist who really pioneered this field way back in 1983, she defined emotional labor as the management of one's own emotions to meet work requirements, inducing them, suppressing them, whatever the job calls for.
Inducing or suppressing.
Yeah. And she made this really crucial distinction between surface acting and deep acting. Surface acting is basically putting on a mask. You pretend to feel an emotion that seems appropriate for the situation, even if inside you feel totally different.
Yeah.
Smiling when you're utterly exhausted.
Right, we've all done that.
We all have. Deep acting, though, that's different. That's when you genuinely try to align your inner feelings with the required emotion. You might try to generate real sympathy for a difficult customer, or in Chloe's case, try to actually feel understanding for Mr. Gable.
That sounds much harder, more draining.
It is. In nursing, this emotional labor is constant, whether it's just a superficial smile or that deeper effort to really connect with the patient's suffering. And, some studies show that controlling these emotions, even just superficially, can help nurses maintain professionalism and build effective relationships. That can actually be therapeutically valuable for patients, ironically.
So it's not just about the nurse acting, it's about this constant internal negotiation of their emotional state. That sounds incredibly exhausting.
It absolutely is, and it's particularly evident in certain roles. If you look at public health nurses or PHNs, especially in places like Japan where some key research was done, they offer an incredibly vivid case study for this kind of intense emotional labor.
Public health nurses,
Yeah.
why them specifically?
Well, they're in this fascinating, often really conflicted position. They're both public servants and dedicated nursing professionals. So their work isn't just about acute care in a hospital. It's about deep, long-term community health issues.
Okay, so more prolonged contact.
Exactly. Which means they're constantly dealing with incredibly sensitive and emotionally charged situations. Things like child rearing isolation, various forms of abuse, child abuse, elder abuse, domestic violence. They often find themselves navigating really complex ethical dilemmas, grappling with ambivalent thoughts, maybe disagreements between individuals and families, or even just trying to fairly distribute limited public services. This relentless need for emotional management, well, as you can imagine, it becomes an immense burden over time.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
And within this demanding environment, these PHNs face very specific emotional challenges. For instance, they often experience what researchers term negative emotions towards residents. Now, this isn't necessarily about disliking the person, but it's more a visceral reaction to the situation they're facing. It can manifest as feeling aggressive attitudes, maybe a sense of agitation or fear or profound discomfort when they're dealing with residents who are highly emotional. One nurse vividly describes someone slamming the desk in frustration.
Oof. Yeah.
They also deal with frequent emotional complaints where they might feel surprise, confusion, or deep frustration because of unexpected, inconsistent, or just repeated grievances. Imagine trying to help someone with a chronic issue, advising them, and they just ignore it again and again. That leads to a significant source of frustration, this feeling about the lack of behavior change in residents.
That must be incredibly demoralizing.
It is. And then there's the challenge when residents conceal their true feelings or maybe the facts of their situation. That breeds doubts, anxiety, discomfort, and agitation in the nurses trying to help them.
So they're facing all this anger, frustration, deception, while being expected to remain calm and composed. It sounds like they're managing a constant emotional battlefield.
Precisely. Yet, and this is the paradox, in stark contrast, PHNs also experience very strong resident-focused emotions.
Yeah.
This includes profound sympathy toward the resident who is in front of me. This isn't some detached observation. It's often a deep, empathetic pain for those in difficult situations.
Okay.
One nurse, who was a parent herself, put it perfectly. As a parent, I very much sympathize with the complaints and feelings of parents. And alongside this empathetic pain, there's usually a powerful, genuine hope to be of use, a sincere desire to actually help these individuals. It's this continuous back and forth, this oscillation between these challenging negative emotions and these deeply compassionate ones that really defines their emotional landscape.
Wow. That's a tightrope walk.
It really is. And to navigate this incredibly complex emotional terrain, PHNs operate under a specific set of emotional rules. Now, these aren't usually written policies in a handbook.
More like unspoken expectations.
Exactly. Deeply ingrained professional norms that guide their interactions. First, you have what are called duty performance rules. This means things like seeking exploratory understanding, actively listening, trying to recognize the tone behind the words, genuinely attempting to determine the resident's true needs and values.
Trying to read between the lines.
Very much so. One nurse talked about trying to figure out if they just want me to listen to their story or if they want some kind of solution. It also includes directives like always responding calmly, maintaining distance, which means suppressing their own personal emotional reactions, continuing involvement by making efforts not to make residents uncomfortable, and consistently fulfilling responsibilities by giving accurate, specialized advice.
So it's like they have to be a detective, a therapist, and maintain this almost robotic calm all at once. That is a huge burden.
Absolutely. Then there's the crucial rule of fairness. This means performing accurately based on rules, like following existing laws and policies, and perhaps most importantly, supporting all residents impartially, regardless of personal feelings or how difficult the interaction is. As one PHN bluntly put it, rules are rules no matter what I think.
Wow. Black and white.
And finally, there are intimacy rules, which paradoxically dictate maintaining a friendly yet highly professional demeanor. This involves communicating while maintaining a friendly atmosphere and ensuring residents can talk more easily.
How do they do that?
Well, it might mean things like smiling, even when faced with a really serious or difficult story, or maybe strategically avoiding overly polite language to get to the main issues more quickly and effectively. It's all about building trust, but within very clearly defined professional boundaries.
Okay, so they have these rules, these expectations. How do they actually manage all these conflicting emotions day in, day out?
Right, so when it comes to actually managing these emotions, PHNs use various emotional regulation strategies. Some are considered adaptive, meaning they help them cope constructively and hopefully prevent burnout. A key one is understanding and giving significance to the current situation.
What does that look like?
For example, if a resident is aggressive, an adaptive strategy is to attribute that behavior to their illness or their circumstances rather than taking it personally. This allows the nurse to accept it, process it, without letting it drain them emotionally.
Kind of like reframing it.
Exactly. It's a form of cognitive reappraisal. Another adaptive strategy is consciously thinking about how to respond, carefully choosing the right language, planning support strategies without getting emotionally entangled themselves.
That sounds like a really powerful way to handle difficult situations, almost like a mental judo move.
It is. It really is. But then, of course, there are maladaptive emotional regulation strategies. These are less helpful in the long run and can lead to dissonance and burnout.
Okay, like what?
These might include thinking there's a personal cause or cause in the resident. So maybe dismissing what a resident says or internally deciding their complaints are clearly wrong or exaggerated. It could also involve thinking there is a cause in the administration, basically externalizing blame onto the system, or even thinking that something must be done personally, where the nurse tries to make oneself bigger than necessary and solve absolutely everything on their own, taking on too much responsibility.
Ah, the hero complex trap.
Precisely. These maladaptive strategies, while totally understandable human reactions, inevitably lead to emotional depletion and ultimately can contribute significantly to professional burnout.
So how they think about the situation is key.
Absolutely. And the way PHNs express emotions is also a huge aspect of their emotional labor. They employ what are called emotional expressions based on friendliness. This is about outwardly displaying positive emotions to residents, even if they don't feel them internally.
The surface acting we talked about.
Exactly. Subtle cues like nodding, actively checking on their stories, verbally conveying understanding, and even, as one nurse mentioned, maintaining a smile, even when faced with a serious or difficult story. This helps impart a sense of security and approachability.
Okay.
Alongside this, they utilize emotional expressions based on calmness. This involves actively controlling emotions and confronting residents without revealing any negative feelings they might have, or sometimes even quietly watching until the resident's anger has subsided before trying to engage.
Waiting it out.
Right. Now, interestingly, some researchers argue that these emotional expressions might not just be surface acting. They suggest they could actually be true, sincere responses in some cases, or perhaps a highly developed professional skill honed over years of practice.
Ah, so it becomes second nature, almost authentic through practice.
Potentially. But regardless, the bottom line is that fostering these adaptive emotional regulation strategies and, crucially, building a genuinely supportive workplace environment, colleagues, supervisors who get it, these are absolutely vital for mitigating the immense emotional burden on PHNs. It's about ensuring they can provide effective, long-term support without collapsing under the weight of it all.
That makes so much sense. The idea that the system itself, or just the sheer demands of the role, can push people into these really difficult emotional contortions. And it's not just about this emotional labor concept. It sounds like there's a deeper psychological toll that really impacts the individual.
Exactly right. This persistent emotional toll, this constant pressure, can manifest clinically as burnout, which very often presents with a key symptom called depersonalization.
Depersonalization. What does that mean in this context?
In this context, depersonalization is essentially an emotional detachment. It's often an unconscious defense mechanism where clinicians start to see patients less as unique individuals with complex lives and more as, well, as tasks or objects to be managed. You see this reflected directly in tools like the Maslach burnout inventory, which is widely used to assess burnout. It includes statements like, I feel I look after certain patients' clients impersonally as if they are objects, or even, I really don't care about what happens to some of my patients' clients.
That's brutal.
It's brutal, but it's often an involuntary shift that allows them to simply function in overwhelming high-stress environments. Dr. Jesse Gold, who's a psychiatrist and a chief wellness officer, shared this truly chilling anecdote that illustrates it perfectly. A clinician was recounting a horrific car accident tragedy, multiple deaths, children involved at a family dinner, and described it like I was ordering a cheeseburger.
Oh my God.
It sounds incredibly callous, right?
Mm.
But Dr. Gold emphasizes this isn't callousness. It's a deep-seated numbness, a protective mechanism against being utterly overwhelmed by trauma. Clinicians in this state describe feeling like they're not processing things like a human anymore.
That's such a stark image, like an emotional shield that just solidifies over time, but it sounds incredibly isolating.
It is profoundly isolating. And this depersonalization is really a facet of a broader phenomenon called dissociation. That's where the emotional detachment deepens, leading to a profound loss of empathy, not only for patients, but sometimes even for oneself, for one's own feelings.
A loss of connection to everything.
Yes. One particularly poignant description I came across was, I used to be able to go into work and see the roses through all of the thorns, but now I only see the thorns. It speaks volumes about that gradual, insidious erosion of joy and meaning in their work.
Yeah.
At its most severe, clinicians can feel like they're nothing more than cogs in a broken healthcare machine, interchangeable, devoid of personal impact or value. But it's so crucial to understand that this is a protective response. It is not a personal failing or some kind of moral deficiency.
That's important.
Dr. Gold hammers this point home. It's the system that needs fixing, far more often than the individual clinician needs fixing. The individual is simply responding, adapting to an unsustainable environment. And a really dangerous consequence of prolonged depersonalization and dissociation is something called alexithymia.
Alexithymia.
Yeah, it's the clinical term for the inability to recognize or describe one's own emotions. Imagine being a healthcare provider, constantly exposed to trauma and suffering, and slowly losing the capacity to even identify what you yourself are feeling.
That sounds terrifying and incredibly counterproductive for someone in a caring profession.
It's perilous for them. It directly impacts their ability to process their own experiences, which they need to do to stay healthy, and ironically, it undermines their ability to genuinely empathize with patients in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
And sometimes medical training itself can inadvertently foster this.
How so?
Well, historically, there's often been a culture, maybe less so now, but still present, that discourages emotional display. Keep a stiff upper lip, right? One patient recalled supervisors telling them they made faces or didn't take my job seriously when they reacted naturally, humanly to distressing situations. This kind of cultural norm, repeated over time, can lead clinicians to lose touch with their internal emotional states entirely, disconnecting them from a vital part of their own humanity.
So if it's often the system that's broken, not just the individual, how do we begin to repair this? What are the strategies, both for individuals and maybe more importantly, for the systems they operate within, to address this profound emotional toll?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Mm.
Dr. Jesse Gold proposes several really compelling strategies to overcome depersonalization and alexithymia, but she always stresses that individual solutions must be coupled with systemic change. It can't be one or the other.
Right, makes sense.
So first, She highlights the critical importance of recognizing burnout early, catching it before these symptoms become deeply entrenched. Early warning signs like persistent emotional exhaustion, a pervasive sense of cynicism, feeling detached, or a decreased feeling of personal accomplishment, these should be seen as red flags that demand intervention, not things to just push through.
Don't ignore the signs.
Absolutely not. Second, seeking therapy is vital for healthcare workers. They need a safe, confidential space to process difficult emotions and reconnect with themselves. As Gold powerfully states, "I would always want a therapist who sees a therapist. I think it's healthy to admit that our job affects us too." Therapy helps clinicians regain that emotional recognition and description, allowing them to actually process their experiences rather than just compartmentalizing or numbing out.
Normalize therapists needing therapy too. I like that.
Exactly. Third, and this is a tricky one, creating emotional boundaries while staying connected is absolutely key. It's a delicate balancing act.
How do you do that?
Well, she says, not feeling anything is protective in the job, but maybe it isn't good all the time. Therapy, alongside things like mindfulness practices, can help clinicians establish these healthier boundaries. It allows them to care deeply without fully absorbing the trauma of others, preventing that empathic distress fatigue.
Okay, boundaries, not walls.
Precisely. But critically, fourth, challenging systemic burnout causes is non-negotiable. The common refrain in so many demanding professions is, "You fix you," right? Implying individual resilience is the sole answer.
Yeah, toughen up.
Exactly. And Gold argues vehemently against this. She points out that true, sustainable relief comes from changing the system, addressing impossible workloads, increasing support staff, creating genuinely supportive and empathetic workplace environments where people feel safe to be vulnerable. You simply can't therapize away a fundamentally broken system.
Systemic problems need systemic solutions.
Absolutely. And lastly, reconnecting with the meaning in the work can be incredibly powerful. Finding ways to reignite that sense of purpose that probably drew them to the profession in the first place. This might be through peer support groups where shared experiences normalize the struggle, or maybe through creative outlets that allow for emotional expression outside of the clinical setting. Ultimately, burnout is not a personal flaw. It's a systemic issue. Addressing it requires both individual coping mechanisms and fundamental institutional reform.
That's such a powerful point about the system needing to change, not just the individual being crushed by it. But what about when this pressure, this expectation to perform a particular emotional state spills out beyond specific professions like healthcare and into our broader society?
Right, when it becomes a cultural norm.
Yeah, because it feels like it really shapes how we communicate, what we deem acceptable, even what we feel we must express publicly. You know, the other day I was just scrolling through a professional networking site like LinkedIn or something, and I saw this post that just made me stop and think. I was scrolling through a professional networking site the other day and saw a post that made me pause. It was about a company's response to some public tragedy in the comments section. Wow, it was a perfect storm of what I've been researching lately. This idea of the empathic superego. It made me imagine a specific scenario. Let's picture a young man named Alex working at some trendy tech startup in, say, Berlin. A major tragic international event occurs, and the company's Slack channels just explode with public displays of grief and solidarity.
Performative solidarity.
Right. The CEO posts this long, very emotional message. Everyone is changing their profile pictures, sharing links to donate, prefaced with how devastated and heartbroken they are. Now, Alex feels horrified by the event, deeply so, but his reaction is quiet, it's internal. He's actually a historian by education, so he's thinking about the event's complex geopolitical roots, the long-term implications. He feels that a public performance of sadness isn't just insufficient, but maybe even a bit disrespectful to the complexity of the situation.
A different kind of processing.
Exactly. Yet in the team meeting, when he stays silent, instead of echoing the prescribed emotional script, heartbroken, devastated, he feels the weight of his colleagues' judgment. His thoughtful quietness is perceived as coldness, as a lack of empathy.
Silence equals complicity, or worse.
Precisely. Afterward, I thought about how this pressure to perform a specific, public-facing emotion just flattens all discourse. Alex didn't lack empathy. His empathy was just different, more analytical, less performative. But in a culture that demands this singular, visible emotional response, his authentic reaction was deemed morally deficient. And that creates this really strange paradox. The societal mandate for empathy can actually silence diverse perspectives and genuine communication, forcing everyone into an emotional uniform and punishing anyone who doesn't wear it.
That story is a perfect, almost chilling illustration of this concept that's been termed the empathic superego. It shows exactly how it's profoundly shaping our public and professional lives.
The empathic superego. Tell me more about that.
Well, traditionally, Freud's superego was seen as this internal moral regulator governing our behavior through guilt and conscience. Don't do that. It's wrong. But this empathic superego is different. It's newer, maybe more pervasive. It's this moral authority that doesn't just demand you do the right thing. It demands you feel the right thing. And perhaps even more importantly, that you show everyone you're feeling the right thing. It operates less through guilt and more through shame and this powerful drive for what's called affective alignment.
Affective alignment.
Yeah, the pressure to match the emotional tone of the moment, of the group. It creates this relentless internal voice, maybe an external one too, that rewards emotional visibility, fluency, immediacy. To feel it now, feel it strongly, and show it. And it's subtly but powerfully scolds emotional restraint, detachment, or any questioning of the prescribed emotional narrative.
Wow. So it's not enough just to be a good person. You have to perform being a good person emotionally. That sounds, well, exhausting and kind of inauthentic.
It absolutely is both. Culturally, this translates into these really powerful imperatives that push us towards constant emotional performance.
Yeah.
We see effective coercion everywhere.
Effective coercion.
Yeah, individuals are pressured, sometimes subtly, sometimes very overtly, to match the prevailing emotional tone of a group or a situation. Think about, a workplace email chain after some minor incident where everyone feels compelled to express exaggerated concern, even if they don't truly feel it that strongly. Or maybe a friend group where you feel you must express outrage about some celebrity's actions just to fit in.
Right, or you're seen as not caring.
Exactly. This creates this pervasive culture of performance anxiety, especially amplified on social media, where emotional resonance becomes a form of moral currency. If you don't express the right emotion with enough visible intensity, your moral standing gets questioned.
Yeah, I see that all the time online.
Disagreement is often interpreted not as a different perspective, but as a lack of compassion. Silence is seen as complicity. And any attempt at nuance, like Alex trying to think historically, gets framed as avoidance or even an admission of guilt. This is precisely why you see politicians and brands increasingly engaging in these elaborate, effective performances to gain public favor. Social media just pours gasoline on this fire, turning what should be genuine emotion into a public spectacle that can be instantly judged, rewarded, or, as Alex experienced, punished. This whole phenomenon dangerously flattens discourse and really stifles authentic expression for anyone who doesn't neatly conform to the expected emotional uniform.
It forces conformity.
Yes. And what's especially intriguing, I think, is how this concept plays out when you look at cultural differences in emotion norms.
Okay.
You might instinctively assume, right, that people in more collectivist cultures, places like China or Singapore, would show greater conformity to all social norms, including emotional ones. That's the stereotype anyway.
Yeah, that makes sense. Group harmony over individual expression.
But studies reveal a really surprising exception when it comes to emotion norms specifically. It turns out that people in more individualistic nations like the US, the UK, Australia, actually exhibit greater emotional conformity to their own culture's dominant emotion norms.
Wait, really? More conformity in individualistic cultures? That seems completely backwards.
It does, doesn't it? It leads to more emotional homogeneity within these societies.
Yeah.
What that means is, in individualistic countries, people's actual emotions, the ones they experience day to day, tend to be more similar to those of their compatriots. This applies not only to valued emotions, the emotions people want to feel, like happiness, but also to the emotions they actually experience.
Okay, hold on. That's counterintuitive. I always thought individualistic cultures were all about being yourself, expressing your unique, authentic feelings. Why on earth would they show more emotional conformity? That's a real head-scratcher.
It is, and that's precisely the paradox. The theory behind it is quite nuanced, actually. Individualistic cultures place this incredibly strong, almost sacred emphasis on the authentic self and on individual emotional experiences. Find yourself, express yourself.
Right.
But this heightened focus on internal feeling and personal expression, paradoxically, seems to create greater pressure to conform to socially desirable emotions. For instance, think about the US. There's an incredibly high cultural value placed on happiness, right?
Absolutely. The pursuit of happiness is right there in the founding documents.
Exactly. So if you are constantly told that authentic self-expression means being happy and pursuing happiness, then not being happy or expressing sadness or anger can feel like a personal failing or like you're deviating from the expected norm. This creates this implicit yet really powerful societal expectation to be happy, or at least to present a happy face.
Ah, okay. The pressure to perform the valued emotion.
Yeah, precisely. And furthermore, people in more individualistic cultures are generally more likely to express their emotions openly in everyday interactions compared to some collectivist cultures, where emotional restraint might be more valued. This constant public display of emotion can actually intensify the pressure to conform to social norms about how to feel and what to express.
Like an echo chamber of feelings.
Sort of. If everyone around you is outwardly expressing excitement or outrage, there's a strong pull to match that emotional energy, even if your internal state is different. It's like this feedback loop. The emphasis on individual emotion leads to more public expression, which then creates more visible norms, which in turn increases the pressure to conform to those norms.
That makes a strange kind of sense now.
Now, while this broad trend holds, it's also worth noting that these norms aren't entirely uniform across all cultures, lumped together as individualistic or collectivist. For example, some East Asian collectivist cultures might place a high value on calm, low-arousal, positive emotions, like serenity, whereas a collectivist culture like Mexico might emphasize high-arousal, positive feelings like excitement and joy, which is actually more similar to individualistic countries like the U.S. in that specific regard. It's a complex tapestry of emotional expectations, not a simple binary.
Fascinating. Okay, so there's this pressure to conform, amplified in some surprising ways. But then, when this empathic superego meets the digital age, especially social media, what are the real-world consequences? Particularly thinking about mental health here. I'm thinking about the way so much of this plays out in what we often call cancel culture.
You're hitting on a really critical point there, because this confluence of what we might call subjective morality and intense public pressure has profound mental health implications, especially with the rise of cancel culture. We find ourselves in this deeply troubling paradox of non-judgmentalism, subjective morality, and cancel culture.
Okay, unpack that paradox.
On the one hand, society increasingly encourages tolerance and non-judgmentalism, right? There's this emphasis that everyone's individual truth, their lived experience, is valid. Yet, simultaneously, we often seem to lack clear, objective moral standards for ethical evaluation, leading to a kind of pervasive moral relativism. Your truth, my truth.
Right. It gets confusing.
Into this vacuum steps cancel culture, which often takes a really oversimplified approach to incredibly complex issues or human failings. It can lead very quickly to public shaming, ostracization, often without anything resembling due process, consideration of context, or even genuine inquiry into the facts, just immediate condemnation.
And social media fuels that fire.
Massively. It amplifies the mob mentality, where opinions can solidify into an unchallengeable consensus at lightning speed, often based on incomplete or misrepresented information.
So what does that do to people's mental health?
The consequences are severe. There's the pervasive fear of public scrutiny and retribution. This fear can suppress dissenting opinions, stifle genuine dialogue, and, most alarmingly, create a suffocating culture of conformity. Individuals become afraid to express anything that might be misinterpreted or deemed problematic by the prevailing emotional zeitgeist of the moment.
Walking on eggshells constantly.
Exactly. This absence of objective moral standards, combined with the instant, often unyielding judgment of the online crowd, significantly exacerbates stress, anxiety, and self-doubt. People struggle with uncertainty, with conflicting values, constantly second-guessing themselves. Did I say the wrong thing? Did I feel the wrong thing? Furthermore, there's a significant erosion of discourse. Instead of meaningful debate or even just uncomfortable conversation, disagreements often devolve instantly into personal attacks, moral posturing, and sheer emotional condemnation. This environment, far from fostering connection or understanding, actually hinders genuine dialogue and further erodes any semblance of real empathy. It's a vicious cycle where the demand for emotional alignment ends up creating deeper divisions and widespread mental distress.
It's truly chilling how that demand for emotional conformity, especially online, can stifle genuine thought and connection on such a societal level. But as you hinted earlier, the problem isn't just societal, is it? It can happen in the most intimate spaces, too, in our closest relationships, eroding trust and even maybe one's sense of self. I heard a story recently that really drove home the darker, more personal side of this empathy problem, what some thinkers are calling the danger of knowing.
The danger of knowing. Yes, that's a powerful frame.
I heard a story from a viewer, actually, that perfectly illustrates this darker, more intimate side of the empathy problem, what some thinkers call the danger of knowing. It's about a woman, let's call her Maya, whose long, complicated relationship with her partner ended. And it wasn't a simple, nasty breakup. It was one of those slow, painful, drifting apart situations filled with love, resentment, deep sadness.
Yeah.
Messy.
Great stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. When she confided in her best friend, the friend immediately jumped in with, "Oh, you were trauma bonded. I've read all about it. He was a classic narcissist and you were the empath. It's so clear."
The armchair diagnosis.
Totally. Her friend, armed with all this pop psychology from social media, began to explain Maya's own experience to her. She wasn't really listening. She was diagnosing. Every time Maya tried to express a nuanced feeling like a moment of missing him or a fond memory, or even her own sense of culpability in how things ended, her friend would reframe it. "Oh, that's just the cognitive dissonance talking," or "That's a classic response to narcissistic abuse."
Wow. Overriding her reality.
Completely. Maya said she had never felt more alone. Her unique, messy, deeply personal story of love and loss was being erased and replaced by this neat, prepackaged, and ultimately totally foreign narrative. Now, her friend wasn't being malicious. She truly believed she was being deeply empathetic by understanding the situation so completely, so quickly.
Right. She thought she was helping.
But to me, this is the most subtle and perhaps the most profound danger of empathy's overreach. It's the illusion of knowing. True compassion isn't about rushing in with a diagnosis or a label you learned online. It's about witnessing. It's about having the humility to say, "Look, I can't possibly know exactly how you feel, but I'm here. I'm here to listen to your story and all its complexity for as long as it takes you to tell it." It's the difference between, I don't know, colonizing someone's emotional world and simply sitting with them in it.
That story cuts right to the heart of it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It raises that truly important question. When does empathy, which is fundamentally meant to connect us, subtly transform into a form of control? Or even, as you put it so well, erasure? This speaks directly to the problem of projection and the illusion of knowing. At its core, empathy is about imagining another's interior world, right? Trying to step into their shoes, perceive what they might be feeling. However, and this is absolutely crucial, we have to remember that imagination is not perception.
Okay.
Big difference.
Huge difference. It is not truly knowing. The real risk here, and honestly one we encounter all the time, is projection. That's where we recreate them in our own image, believing we understand their pain or their experience because maybe we've felt something similar, but crucially, not their specific unique pain in that moment.
We map our experience onto theirs.
Exactly. And this is what's sometimes referred to as the phenomenological fallacy, the dangerous belief that feeling as if one knows does not equate to knowing. Just because you feel like you understand doesn't mean you actually do understand their specific reality. Your feeling of understanding isn't the same as the other person's actual lived experience.
Wow. Okay, so it's not enough to just feel like you understand. It's almost like empathy. When it's taken to an extreme or done carelessly, becomes this kind of emotional guesswork where you're trying to force someone else's complex reality into your own neat, predefined categories.
Precisely. And when this unexamined empathy runs wild, when we don't check our assumptions, it can lead to what's been termed emotional colonization.
Emotional colonization, that's a strong term.
It is a strong term, and it's meant to be. It's where empathy, often dressed innocently and even virtuously in the language of care and understanding, "I just want to help, I understand you so well," can actually erase difference, obscure boundary, and bypass consent. It happens when the empathizer's framework, their interpretation, their labels, like trauma bonded or narcissist, subtly displaces the experiencer's actual reality.
Can you give another example?
Sure. Think of a really well-meaning parent who imposes all sorts of protective behaviors on their child based on their own assumed fears for the child's future, even if the child actually feels suffocated and misunderstood by those actions. Or maybe a teacher who silences a dissenting student in a discussion to maintain an empathic, harmonious narrative they've constructed for the group, inadvertently denying that students' legitimate feelings or perspective.
Right, controlling the narrative under the guise of care.
Exactly. In these scenarios, what starts as genuine care can, with this overreach, transform into a subtle form of control. Compassion, paradoxically, can turn into misrecognition, where the very attempt to connect actually overwrites someone else's lived experience with our own assumptions and interpretations. And the danger is it often looks and feels virtuous. It creates this superficial warmth, promises unity, but without careful examination, it can become deeply invasive, deeply invalidating.
And that must feel incredibly lonely for the person on the receiving end.
It leads us to this peculiar and really profound form of suffering, what's been called the loneliness of the overunderstood.
The loneliness of the overunderstood, not misunderstood.
Exactly. This isn't the familiar pain of being misunderstood, where you feel unseen or unheard. It's something far more subtle, maybe even more insidious. It stems from being understood too quickly, too completely, too confidently. It's the unique loneliness of emotional preemption.
Emotional preemption, like someone jumps in before you've even finished.
Kind of. Our society, especially now with its widespread therapeutic literacy, everyone having a basic grasp of psychological terms and concepts from social media or wherever, can lead us to rush to emotional first aid before truly assessing the wound. It's like, imagine emergency responders arriving on scene before the accident is even fully unfolded, assuming they know the nature of the crisis before it's even been described by the people involved.
That's fascinating. So when someone jumps in with, oh, you must be feeling X because of Y, even if it's totally well-intentioned, it can actually shut down the real conversation before it starts.
Exactly. Take the example of Marcus, a combat veteran. When he tried to explain the strange, almost inexplicable guilt he felt about simply enjoying a peaceful sunset back home, his partner, who had read a lot about trauma psychology, immediately labeled it survivor's guilt.
Okay, which might even be accurate clinically.
It might have been clinically correct, yes. And her empathy was genuinely motivated. She wanted to connect. But Marcus just stopped talking. His unique, specific, messy experience of that paradox, feeling guilt and peace, was immediately compressed into this neat, pre-existing psychiatric category. The essence of his unique feeling in that moment remained unwitnessed.
Wow.
There's a real paradox here. The very expertise, the psychological knowledge that's meant to illuminate, can actually become a barrier to true connection. It can cast shadows over the individual's unique experience because we become so adept at recognizing patterns that we start to see attachment wounds before we see the person. We see the labor before the human.
We jump to the category instead of listening to the story.
Precisely. And this idea of emotional translation itself can be a subtle form of dismissal. When we confidently say, I understand exactly how you feel, what we often implicitly mean is, I can translate your experience into terms that make sense to me. But translation, as anyone who speaks multiple languages knows, inherently involves loss.
Yeah, something always gets lost.
It filters out the untranslatable elements, the nuances, the contradictions, the deeply personal specifics that don't fit neatly into our pre-existing categories or experiences. Think back to Elena's experience in that trauma therapy group you mentioned. While everyone was being empathetic, trying to connect through shared trauma, her specific story started to sound like everyone else's. The messy details that made her experience uniquely hers felt irrelevant to the group's collective narrative of trauma and recovery. She was being empathized with, yes, but she felt like she was disappearing, her individual voice fading into this generic chorus of trauma survivor.
So she was heard, but not truly seen. That's a really powerful distinction.
Exactly. And similarly, David, whose wife died, found people immediately offering these standard narratives of grief, for the 5 stages or whatever, often well-meaning, but ultimately feeling hollow to him. There was no space created for his specific, deeply strange details, like continuing to set 2 coffee cups in the morning for months after she was gone, or talking to his houseplants in her voice as if she might reply.
Those specific, maybe irrational details?
Those details, which might contain profound, unique truths about his particular loss, were unwitnessed because they didn't fit the expected script of normal grieving. This is what's been called the violence of premature closure. When understanding, or the claim of understanding, is offered too quickly, it subtly signals that the story is complete, that the conversation is over, that the feeling is categorized and done with.
Right, okay, I get it. Moving on.
Exactly. But trauma, grief, profound personal transformation, these are rarely neat, finite narratives. They're often ongoing relationships with the inexplicable, constantly unfolding, shifting, and resisting easy categorization or resolution.
That makes sense. It's not a problem to be solved. It's an experience to be lived.
Precisely. And in professional settings, like therapy, this manifests as a real clinical temptation. There's a powerful pull for clinicians, even experienced ones, to quickly identify patterns, to label, to reflect back what they think they hear based on their training, rather than simply staying present, truly present, with what's emerging from the client in that moment.
Resisting the urge to fix or categorize immediately.
Yes. Dr. Martinez, a therapist working with complex trauma patients, noted this pull. When a client described feeling split in two, the immediate clinical temptation was to interpret that as dissociation, a known symptom. But Dr. Martinez challenged himself to stay curious about the client's unique metaphor first, to explore what living in two time zones the client's actual words meant to them before imposing a clinical interpretation. The unique imagery, the client's own language, needs to be honored before it's categorized or translated. It's a fundamental shift from being primarily a diagnostician to being primarily a genuine witness.
Witnessing. I like that word. It feels less active, more receptive.
It is. And this illusion of knowing, this emotional colonization we've been talking about, ties directly into a deeper, perhaps more pervasive issue: the gradual erosion of autonomy and self-respect. When we consistently tolerate these subtle forms of diminished autonomy, when others subtly assert control over our experiences, our narratives, our feelings, our self-respect slowly, almost imperceptibly erodes.
How does that connect?
Well, think about some of these specific behaviors identified in research on eroding self-respect.
Yeah.
One is accepting others make decisions about your experiences. Remember Lisa's date, who, without even asking, just declared for her, "You don't really want dessert."
Yeah, patronizing.
It's more than a patronizing. It effectively negates her preference, her internal state. And if that happens repeatedly in different contexts, it implicitly teaches us that our internal experience or desire is somehow less valid than someone else's opinion about us.
Okay, I see the link.
Another deeply damaging behavior is letting others tell your stories wrong. Remember Lisa's supervisor at the company party, attributing her project's success entirely to himself, minimizing her contributions, allowing these false narratives to stand, maybe because it's easier than confronting them, allowing others to rewrite our own personal histories. It chips away at our sense of reality and the integrity of our own memories.
Yeah, I know that feeling of being written out of your own story. It's infuriating, but sometimes it really does feel easier just to let it go than to constantly fight it.
And that's exactly how the erosion happens. It's insidious. Furthermore, preemptively lowering expectations is another common self-defeating behavior. Before presenting ideas, Lisa would preface them with phrases like, "This is probably stupid, but," or "It's just a thought."
Selling yourself short before you even start.
Exactly. She's effectively negotiating against herself before anyone else even has a chance to react, guaranteeing her own diminishment. While it feels like a protective mechanism against criticism or disappointment, it also ensures that one's own needs, ideas, or contributions are framed as negligible right from the start.
Yeah.
Then there's the trap of treating basic decency as extraordinary generosity. Lisa would be effusively grateful when a teammate simply listened to her idea without interrupting, or when a date actually asked her opinion on a restaurant choice. This skewed gratitude reveals how little she had come to expect, how low the bar had been set, and it reinforces a cycle where others exert minimal effort, minimal respect, yet receive excessive praise, further normalizing this diminished treatment.
That's a tough cycle to break.
It is. And finally, perhaps one of the most powerful signs of compromised self-respect is staying in situations to prove you're not too sensitive. Lisa endured countless conversations, even relationships, that were genuinely demeaning or hurtful, all to prove she wasn't too sensitive, too emotional, or difficult.
The don't be difficult pressure.
Exactly. This performative tolerance tragically mistakes suffering for strength and virtue. It's based on an internal narrative that says, if you can withstand the pain, you are strong. But in reality, it's often a sign that self-respect is being actively violated. It speaks to being too sensitive for situations that, frankly, require you to be numb to survive them with your dignity intact. This gradual erosion of self-respect, piece by piece, is a profound, hidden cost of empathy's overreach, where our own internal compass gets overwritten by the expectations, projections, and narratives of others.
Wow. Okay, that's an incredibly sobering picture you've painted. We've explored some really significant challenges with empathy, the sheer exhaustion of performing it, the societal pressure to conform emotionally, and the deeply personal cost when it crosses that line into control or erasure. So if this seemingly simple virtue has these complex and even dark limitations, how do we actually navigate a world that still desperately needs connection and understanding? Where do we go from here? What's the path forward?
That is the crucial question, isn't it? How do we find what we might call a wiser empathy? And to do that, we absolutely must start by acknowledging the limits of empathy as a moral compass.
Okay. Limits.
While empathy is undeniably an incredibly powerful force, one that can motivate pro-social behavior and countless acts of kindness, it's simply not always a force for good. We have to accept that. In fact, it can sometimes deepen divisions, fuel biases, and even inspire aggression.
Empathy inspiring aggression. How does that work?
Well, for example, there was a study back in 2014 where participants were made to empathize strongly with someone who had been harmed by a competitor in a game. What happened? They felt compelled to inflict more pain on that competitor in retaliation. Their empathy for the victim fueled aggression towards the perpetrator.
Wow. So empathy isn't neutral.
It's definitely not neutral, and by its very nature, it's inherently biased. We are far, far more likely to empathize with those who are like us. People in our similar social circles, racial groups, political tribes, are in-group.
It's easier to feel for us than them.
Exactly. And this very bias can be weaponized. It can be used, and has been used throughout history, to spur people to war by mobilizing strong emotional responses for perceived injustices against one's own group, while simultaneously dehumanizing the other, making it harder to empathize with their suffering. In competitive situations, people might even feel pleasure at an outgroup member's pain, that phenomenon chillingly known as schadenfreude, rather than experiencing distress or empathy.
So it's not a universal benevolence button we can push. It's a selective spotlight, and that spotlight can be deliberately manipulated. That's a huge shift in how we usually think about empathy, isn't it?
It truly is. Paul Bloom, who's a renowned psychologist at Yale, argues quite provocatively in his work that empathy is not, in fact, the best guide for moral decisions, precisely because of these biases and limitations.
Not the best guide. What does he suggest instead?
Well, he points out how politicians, for instance, can skillfully use emotionally manipulative stories, maybe highlighting specific sympathetic victims of attacks to promote certain policies, like restrictive anti-immigration laws. This emotional appeal, while evoking genuine empathy for those specific individuals, is deployed strategically, not for universal good, but to manipulate broader public policy by overriding rational analysis.
Using empathy as a tool for persuasion, not necessarily for morality.
Exactly. And surprisingly, research, including large meta-analyses, even suggests there's virtually no relationship between having low empathy and being malicious across various types of aggression. So knowing how empathic someone scores on a test doesn't necessarily tell us how good or bad, kind or cruel they are as a person. It really challenges our fundamental assumption that empathy automatically equates to or leads to moral action.
Okay, so if empathy isn't the perfect moral guide, what's the alternative?
Well, instead of relying solely on empathy, which can be biased and draining, researchers like Bloom and the pioneering neuroscientist Tanya Singer advocate for cultivating compassion.
Empathy versus compassion. What's the difference there?
It's a subtle but important distinction. Compassion is often described as a more distanced, yet still profound form of care and concern for others' well-being. It's feeling for someone rather than feeling with them. Unlike empathy, which can lead to emotional contagion and burnout, feeling another's pain as if it's your own, compassion doesn't seem to suffer from the same limitations of bias and exhaustion.
So it's more sustainable.
Potentially, yes. Neuroimaging studies show it activates different brain areas associated more with affiliation, warmth, and positive feelings, rather than just the distress networks activated by empathy. And crucially, cultivating compassion through practices like loving-kindness meditation can actually improve one's own emotional well-being rather than depleting it. It aims to build this broader, more sustainable sense of care, moving beyond the specific limitations and burdens of pure empathy.
Interesting. So we can cultivate compassion instead.
And what's also quite fascinating is the emerging concept that we can actually learn to regulate empathy itself. While empathy often feels like this automatic, uncontrollable response to seeing someone else's distress, recent evidence suggests we might have a greater capacity to consciously control how much empathy we feel than we realize.
We can control it. How?
Social psychologist Jamil Zaki found that simply believing empathy is controllable makes people significantly more likely to make an effort to empathize, even in difficult situations, like bridging political divides. Think about doctors again. They might consciously learn to tune down their empathy to avoid psychological burnout from constantly absorbing their patient's pain. This isn't coldness. It's often a necessary professional skill for long-term sustainability and effectiveness.
Or a self-preservation skill.
Exactly. Studies have even shown that specific emotion regulation training can improve political attitudes in highly polarized conflicts, allowing individuals to engage more constructively rather than being constantly overwhelmed by reactive tribal emotions. Neurobiologically, we're learning that empathy isn't one single thing anyway. It's really an umbrella term encompassing distinct components. Cognitive empathy, understanding thoughts; emotional empathy, feeling feelings; and motivational empathy, wanting to help. Each involves different neural processes. Research using pain paradigms, for example, shows how these brain activations can be artificially manipulated, like how placebo painkillers can reduce not only your own pain, but also your empathic pain response when seeing someone else in pain. All this suggests our empathic capacity is much more flexible, more trainable, more regulatable than we once thought.
That's a huge takeaway. Empathy isn't a fixed switch that's either on or off. It's more like a dimmer or maybe even a whole mixing desk we can learn to operate. So if we can regulate it, what does that mean for how we should apply it in the real world? How do we build this wiser empathy you're talking about?
Exactly. That dimmer switch or mixing desk analogy is great. All of this research, all these complexities, they push us towards developing what's been called a post-empathic ethic.
Post-empathic, does that mean getting rid of empathy?
No, not at all. It's not about rejecting empathy altogether. That would be throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's more about a fundamental reorientation of its role. Empathy should not be the only, or perhaps even the first, moral compass we instinctively reach for in every situation. We need discernment. We need wisdom to know when a situation truly calls for feeling deeply alongside someone, when it calls for more distanced compassion, when it calls for direct action, or maybe when it simply calls for quiet, respectful presence. Sometimes, paradoxically, withholding a rushed or presumptive form of empathy can actually be the most compassionate response because it allows the other person the space to find their own voice and their own truth without our immediate interpretation or colonization.
Discernment, knowing when and how to apply it.
Yes. And humility is absolutely essential here. We must consciously, consistently acknowledge that we do not truly know the experience of another. Empathy, even at its best, is not omniscience. It's a fragile invitation to imagine, to connect, but it's never a complete download of another person's reality.
Accepting the limits of our knowing.
Exactly. And most importantly, perhaps, we must reclaim boundaries, not as failures of empathy, but as an ethical good. Boundaries are not barriers to empathy. They are its necessary conditions. Knowing clearly where one person ends and another begins is what allows for true, healthy connection. Without boundaries, empathy blurs lines, leading to that emotional colonization, confusion, and ultimately exhaustion.
Boundaries enable connection, they don't prevent it.
Precisely. Ultimately, the paradox of empathy is this. It both binds us together and blurs our distinct identities. It connects us deeply and can also profoundly confuse us. It has immense power to heal, but also, as we've explored today, the capacity to harm when misused or overextended. We have to stop worshiping empathy as this singular, unqualified virtue and stop demanding it on cue from ourselves and from others.
So the takeaway isn't less empathy.
No, we do not necessarily need more empathy in the world. We need wiser empathy. And perhaps more than anything, we need collective permission not to feel everything for everyone all the time. This permission, this discernment, this wisdom is what allows us to truly feel what truly matters when it is most needed, and crucially to do so in a way that's sustainable for ourselves and genuinely helpful to others.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So if we're aiming for this wiser empathy, this more discerning approach, what does that actually look like in practice, particularly in those difficult moments when someone is sharing something truly vulnerable or painful with us? How do we witness effectively without falling into that trap of colonizing their experience?
Right, that's where the rubber meets the road, isn't it? It means making a fundamental shift in how we approach our most intimate and vulnerable interactions, consciously emphasizing witnessing over empathizing, or at least witnessing before empathizing.
Witnessing before empathizing, okay.
So instead of our immediate internal question being, how can I understand this? Or how can I relate this to my own experience? A wiser approach asks, how can I create space for this person's experience to exist exactly as it is right now without my immediate interpretation or judgment? It's a subtle shift in posture, but it's profound.
So how do we do that? What are the practical steps?
Well, practically, one key thing is slowing down the response time. When someone shares something significant, something heavy, allow a bit of silence to hang in the air after they speak, just a beat or two. Resist that almost reflexive urge to immediately jump in, reflect back what you think you heard, offer a solution, or share your own related story. That pause, that silence, communicates that their shared experience is substantial, that it deserves space, and that you're not rushing to process it for them or make it about you.
Let it land.
Exactly, let it land. Next, try to stay curious longer. Instead of offering quick affirmations like, I understand, or that's awful, ask more open-ended questions. Questions that genuinely empower the other person to explore their own experience further, making them the undisputed expert of their own reality. Questions like, what was that like for you? Or, can you tell me more about how that felt in your own words? Or even just say more about that.
Putting them in the driver's seat of their own story.
Precisely. It's also incredibly validating to use their language. Really listen for and stick to the person's own metaphors and imagery. If they say they feel shattered, explore what shattered means to them. Don't immediately translate it into your own preferred term like, oh, you mean traumatized or depressed. Their specific words often contain unique wisdom and insights that clinical or generalized language might inadvertently obscure or dismiss.
Honor their words.
Yes. And along those lines, we must also humbly acknowledge the limits of our understanding. It's perfectly acceptable and often deeply validating for the other person to see something like, wow, I can't fully grasp what that must have been like for you, but I can see how significant this is, or I can't imagine how that felt, but I'm here listening. This validates their experience profoundly without falsely claiming to fully know it.
It's okay not to know.
It's more than okay. It's often more respectful. Crucially, try to resist universalizing their pain too quickly. Focus on the uniqueness of their suffering. Instead of rushing to say, oh yeah, everyone feels that way when they lose someone, which can feel minimizing, try focusing on your particular experience of loss or whatever it is they're sharing. This honors their individuality instead of dissolving their specific pain into some general, abstract pattern.
Keep it specific to them.
Exactly. And perhaps the most challenging part for us as compassionate human beings, we must learn to tolerate discomfort, both theirs and our own. Witnessing, true witnessing, requires staying present with our own feelings of uncertainty, maybe our own helplessness in the face of their pain, and resisting the urge to quickly understand or fix it, simply to alleviate our own anxiety about their suffering. Sometimes the most loving thing is just to sit in the discomfort with them.
Sit with the not knowing.
Exactly. And this leads to this profound, almost paradoxical concept of the sacred space of not being known. There's an immense, often unarticulated relief that people can feel in being allowed to remain partially unknown while still being held.
Allowed to be mysterious, even to those closest to us.
Yes. It honors the irreducible mystery of subjective human experience. It fosters a different kind of love and connection, one that doesn't demand total transparency or complete understanding as a prerequisite for total, unwavering presence and acceptance.
Presence over perfect understanding.
Precisely. This highlights the crucial difference between genuine connection and emotional consumption. Witnessing creates space for another's experience to exist in its fullness without us needing to metabolize it through our own emotional digestive system, without making it primarily about our feelings or our ability to relate. The difference is subtle but huge. It's the difference between saying, oh, I understand, I felt the exact same way when X happened to me, which can inadvertently shift the focus back to us, and saying, I'm here, I can't possibly know what that feels like for you, but I'm not going anywhere.
I'm here, I'm not going anywhere. That feels powerful.
It is incredibly powerful. And this embodies what we might call the ethics of not knowing, this radical idea that perhaps some aspects of human experience, particularly deep suffering or transformation, are meant to remain partially untranslated, unresolved, maybe even fundamentally ununderstood by others. Healing, in this profound sense, can actually require mystery sometimes. It challenges our deeply ingrained cultural assumption that understanding always promotes healing, or that insight invariably leads to transformation. Sometimes the greatest gift we can offer another human being is simply to accompany them faithfully in their opacity, to hold them gently in their contradictions, and to love them deeply in their unique, irreducible, and perhaps ultimately unknowable mystery.
Wow. What a journey through the nuances of empathy. We started with that really powerful personal observation from the therapy room, and we've truly seen how this seemingly simple virtue can become incredibly complex, even problematic, when it's pushed to its limits or demanded inappropriately.
It really leads us to a crucial understanding, doesn't it? While empathy is undoubtedly vital, profoundly human, and often beneficial, an unexamined, mandated, or overreaching empathy can inadvertently create disconnection, erode authenticity, and even lead to profound exhaustion and burnout, both for the giver and sometimes for the receiver.
So it's really about cultivating a wiser empathy, a more discerning empathy, one that recognizes its own boundaries, its own limitations, and appreciates the immense quiet power of simply witnessing another person's reality with without rushing to solve, categorize, or colonize their emotional world.
Exactly.
It reminds us that sometimes, maybe often, the deepest, most respectful connections are forged not through achieving perfect understanding, but through maintaining a patient, humble, and respectful presence. A presence that truly honors the irreducible strangeness, the complexity, and the inherent mystery of being human.